What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here with a look at some best ball content on Underdog Fantasy. We're going to be talking about how to optimally approach your draft from the 4th, 5th, and 6th position in an Underdog Fantasy draft this season. Last week, we posted a video from the 1, 2, 3 spots. You should certainly check that out on the channel. And through the rest of the month of June, we will be taking care of the rest of the first round, talking through optimal starts, correlating for those playoff weeks in best ball tournaments. Obviously, I am primarily focused on building high upside rosters for Underdog's Best Ball Mania 4, a contest with a $15 million prize pool and $3 million up for grabs for first place. So it's really important that we think through all of these correlations in these 1 week playoff environments later in the contest season. If you're new to Underdog, you can start playing today by signing up using the promo code OCCUPY1. It's linked in the description of the video below. If you deposit up to $100 to start playing on Underdog, and Underdog will match that up to $100, 100% match. So you can start playing with $200 in your Underdog bankroll today. Once again, I am treating ADP in the first round as if that is the force majeure that is picking your first player, and then we're going to correlate from there. So looking at ADP on OccupyFantasy.com, because we do have our ADP tracker over the last 7 days. This tracks changes in ADP over the last 7 days, and obviously current ADP for these players updates once a day around 10 o'clock in the morning on OccupyFantasy.com. The 4th overall pick right now, it is June 8th when I'm recording this video, is Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. So I am going to start off this particular build from the 4th spot with Tyreek Hill as my first overall pick on this roster. And using our best ball stack seeker on OccupyFantasy.com, we can filter by Miami, which I've already done here, and see that they play the Jets in Week 15, the Dallas Cowboys in Week 16, and the Baltimore Ravens in that ever-important Week 17 championship week. So those teams are the teams that we want to get some players from to build around a Tyreek Hill start optimally in 2023. Now, from the 4th pick, I have selected Tony Pollard in the 2nd round at the 21st pick. If it comes back around to me like that, I'm pretty happy to lock that in because it gives me Tony Pollard a Week 16 correlation with Tyreek Hill. And then on the other end of the 2-3 turn, I can hopefully get Mark Andrews a little bit ahead of his ADP of 31 and have Week 17 correlation with Tyreek Hill and Mark Andrews Ravens. If we are going to build optimally here, we're probably not going to get Lamar Jackson here for a little bit of reverse correlation with Tyreek Hill, but we can plan ahead when we're drafting from this position once we get Tyreek Hill and mentally lock in Tua Tagovailoa at ADP in the 9th round. Now, a little earlier in this draft season, if you will, on Underdog, Tyreek Hill was actually going closer to the middle of the first round, and sometimes you may see him fall to the middle of the first round. So there is still a small possibility that you can get a Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle double tap here in the first 2 rounds and have a really high upside Dolphins double stack. I can say I do think Chuck and I got a team like that once early in the beginning of May on one of the live streams we've been doing here on the Occupy Fantasy channel. But at current ADP prices, Jalen Waddle going 16.6 now. We see that in the Best Ball Mania Stack Seeker. It's just a little more unlikely than it was early in the process to get that double stack with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Kind of interesting if we just linger here on the Dolphins for a minute. Not a ton of interest from the field in any pass catcher on Miami other than these top 2 guys. We have the 3-headed monster at running back that go in the double-digit rounds with Achane, Mostert, and Wilson. But then we have a couple of wide receivers in Braxton Berrios, the artist formerly known as Robbie Chosen Anderson, and then Durham Smythe at tight end, all kind of sneaking into the draft as a last-round pick for a secondary Dolphins player to stack with Tua Tagovailoa. So that's one thing to just keep in mind when drafting the Dolphins. After the beginning of the draft, there's really not a ton of incentive for anyone to take Tua Tagovailoa if they don't have one of those two players. So as you go through a draft with Tyreek Hill, just be mindful of where Jalen Waddle goes if you don't have him, because that's the owner you're competing with for this Tua Tagovailoa stack with your primary wide receiver. And it's probably okay to reach for Tua around early in the 8th round if you really want the stack, is what I'm trying to communicate here. Now, locking in Pollard and Andrews early, you can go back to our Best Ball Mania stack seeker and add in Baltimore and Dallas to see what some of the secondary and tertiary stacks that are available would be. So with the Dallas Cowboys, we can seek some correlation with the Buffalo Bills and the Detroit Lions. And with the Ravens, we can look to build in some San Francisco 49er or Jacksonville Jaguar players around the start that we have here to just maximize correlation up and down the draft board. I'd emphasize that this is something I would think about in the second half, especially of a draft with a start like this, because if you look at the team I have somewhat mapped out here at the top of the draft, I have deviated from this a little bit because I've done two things. I'm very high on Terry McLaurin in general as far as wide receiver rankings. My fantasy football rankings for the 2023 season on Underdog are available free to Discord subscribers in the Underdog channel of the Occupy Fantasy Discord. Terry McLaurin is a top 10 wide receiver for me this season. I love him here in the 4th round pretty much every single time I can get him. So pretty clear upside pick for me here. And then I think any build that we put together, if we can find some correlation with the Chiefs and the Bengals, because that is a big Week 17 game that's going to be happening, I'm going to happily slot that into my lineups. That's why I've got a Joe Mixon and Kadarius Toney back-to-back selection here in the 5th and 6th rounds, right at ADP. I started draft this way. I'm going to feel very good about wrapping it up the rest of the way through from the 4 pick. From the 5th pick, according to ADP right now, the player you're most likely to get at cost is Cooper Kupp from the Los Angeles Rams. Now going back to the stack seeker, we're going to want to throw the Rams in here. And when we add the Rams in here, what you'll see is that there are some really interesting stacking partners in weeks 15, 16, and 17. The Washington Commanders, the New Orleans Saints, and the New York Giants. None of the players on these teams are particularly expensive except for a couple of assets. So I think when you start with Cooper Kupp at the 5th pick, you probably want to key right in on Chris Olave at pick 20 in the 2nd round. You are within a pick of ADP range on both of these guys. It's probably right around a 50% chance you can start this way. ADP starting to creep up a little bit. Sometimes Cooper Kupp will go 3rd pick overall. Sometimes he'll go 6th, 7th pick overall. Same with Olave. Sometimes he will go in the early part of the 2nd round. Sometimes he will fall to the back of the 2nd round. So this is not a lock start to your draft, but from the perspective of ideal start from the 5th pick, if you get Kupp, I still think this is the correct way to orient your mind about starting from here. Terry McLaurin, correlation with Cooper Kupp in the playoff rounds in the 4th round. And then basically anytime I'm starting with Cooper Kupp, the very first thing I'm thinking about from a correlation standpoint in week 17 is Darren Waller. I think rosters where you have Cooper Kupp, you have to take Darren Waller because of that week 17 correlation with Cooper Kupp. I think that's the best way to lock in a week 17 game stack. The other way would be with Saquon Barkley at the running back position, but then we're passing up on the best possible upside in semifinals week with Olave because you would have to take Barkley in that spot. So just be aware of that. That is the other way to do it, but at cost, I do prefer going Olave and Darren Waller in the 7th round to get my correlation with Cooper Kupp. Going back to our stack seeker, adding Olave in from New Orleans, and we've got a Darren Waller correlation in week 15 as well with the New Orleans Saints. So that's just another reason to prioritize him in the 7th round when you build this way. At the running back position in the 3rd round, Breece Hall doesn't correlate with this build specifically, but he is the most likely running back in that range to still be available for us, going 30.1 overall right now on Underdog. And what's nice about getting Breece Hall here at right about his accurate ADP is that you do have some correlation with the Washington Commanders and Terry McLaurin in the 4th round if you go this direction, because the Commanders have a schedule that brings them to Los Angeles, the New York Jets, and the San Francisco 49ers to close out the fantasy season, if you will, here. So plenty of correlation up and down the board here to begin your draft when you start with Cooper Kupp. I've expanded this here to the double-digit rounds to show you right about where you should plan on getting some other high upside Los Angeles Ram players to pair with Cooper Kupp. Tyler Higbee and Matthew Stafford are very, very easy to obtain in drafts this year. You can take them a little bit ahead of cost from this 5th overall pick slot in the 12th and 13th rounds, and you have a really, really nice 3-1 week 17 game stack here to maximize upside around with Kupp, Stafford, Higbee, and Darren Waller from the 5th overall pick slot. In the 5th round, Chris Godwin correlates with the Saints. They have a week 17 matchup, the Buccaneers and the Saints. So that's another secondary correlation in championship week we can consider. And since we're already planning on getting Darren Waller from the New York Giants on our roster here in the 7th round, if we can, then we should be interested in DeAndre Swift as another running back on this particular type of roster, because there is some correlation with the New York Giants and the Philadelphia Eagles in the playoff slate of weeks this year to build around. More than one way to correlate from the 5th pick in Cooper Kupp, but this is about what I would consider my quote-unquote ideal start from this particular spot on the board. At the 6th overall pick, this is where you're probably going to get Travis Kelce first overall. There's nothing wrong with skipping out on Kelce in the 1st round and opting to get Bijan Robinson, A.J. Brown, Stephon Diggs, and maximizing some upside at one of those positions in the 1st round. I'll talk about how to stack around those players in one of the later videos in this series that we'll post in the next couple of weeks. For the sake of the argument here at ADP, I will take Kelce at cost in the 6th round. And just by looking at Kansas City in our Stack Seeker, you probably do need to pick Mahomes at 19. He's not going to make it back to you in the 3rd round. It's not incredibly likely that he gets picked by someone that doesn't have Travis Kelce, but it does happen. It is pretty easy to get players to pair with Mahomes later in the draft. Obviously, Tony is the next Chief that goes in the 6th round, and then there's a potpourri of wide receivers that you can consider after Kadarius Toney is gone. So it's easy to double stack Mahomes without Kelce. Just think the best way to do it is with Kelce. Starting with a tight end and a quarterback in the first 2 rounds is pretty hard to build around, because the elite running backs and wide receivers in those first 29 picks that go, they're almost certainly very likely to be in some of the winning lineups this year. So you really have to have a perfect draft after a start like this. If you're already traveling down the road of taking Kelce in the 1st round, then we are locked into Kansas City being the best offense in the NFL once again this season. So we need to maximize that upside. Have to look at the fact that the Chiefs and the Bengals are playing in week 17, and therefore we want to make sure we take Mahomes at 19. We probably want to make sure we get Mixon in the 5th round, right at ADP there at pick 54, and get number 1 receiver Kadarius Toney in the 6th round to get the highest upside Kansas City Cincinnati 3-1 out of the way. At running back in the 3rd round, it's right at ADP. Breece Hall, took him in the 5th pick overall slot, would still like him here. I would prefer to get Ramondre Stevenson here if he falls. He goes around pick 27, so it's not super likely that he does fall here. But when we look at who the Chiefs play in the playoffs, it's the New England Patriots, the Las Vegas Raiders, and the Cincinnati Bengals in the playoff weeks this year. Most best ball drafters are going to be looking at this Bengals matchup and not necessarily considering the 1-week tournaments against New England and Las Vegas. So just be aware of those 2 matchups as well here when you get a Kansas City Chiefs start with Travis Kelce at the 6th overall pick. So 3rd round running back selection, Breece Hall most likely to be there. I would take Ramondre or even Josh Jacobs if they're still there at 30 if I can instead. Terry McLaurin, already talked about him being my favorite 4th round pick. This Mixon, Tony 5-6 combination correlates with the Chiefs start. Gabriel Davis in the 7th round. He does have some correlation with the New England Patriots. The Patriots being a week 15 opponent of the Kansas City Chiefs. did not go this far out on the board, but if we don't have Stevenson, we could consider Juju Smith-Schuster in the 9th round, right around pick 100 from the 6th hole. We pick at 102, so could get Juju there. Could consider a Patriots tight end like Mike Gesicki or Hunter Henry late in the draft to correlate with Kansas City. We'll probably have already missed out on we definitely will have already missed out on Devontae Adams in the 1st, 2nd round, building this way. So if you're looking for a Raider correlation later in the draft, you could also look at Jacoby Myers at wide receiver, who goes right around pick 118. So that would be in your 10th, 11th round spot to continue correlating with the Chiefs and the Bengals. So just a quick look at how to correlate your rosters if you are starting from the 4th, 5th, and 6th position in an Underdog fantasy draft this summer. We're really excited to continue drafting best ball teams all spring and summer long here on the Occupy Fantasy YouTube channel. Please make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this. That is the best way to communicate to us to keep producing it for you. We will be back on Sunday with another live stream draft on the channel through Underdog, and we'll be back next week with a look at how to draft from the 7, 8, and 9 positions if that's your starting position on Underdog. Thank you for watching this video, folks. We will talk to you soon.